Good afternoon. My name is Aza Lorena,
And I'm Kyle Jairo.
and today we will be discussing about urbanization and rural to urban migration.
In China and Hong Kong.
Urbanization is defined as the physical growth or the increase in population in urban areas. This can be caused by several factors. Generally, it happens when man's power is extended over nature and is used extensively, especially with technological improvements. Urbanization is closely linked with industrialization. Cities become more important centers of production and commerce, and as a result, more employment opportunities are made available to people. Workers decide to leave rural work for high wages and industries in the cities. Urbanization also occurs when commercialization expands, transportation and communication improves, and when cities are able to give more facilities and services to the people like better healthcare, education, and recreation.
It is natural for people to migrate to places where the quality of life is relatively better than their current state. People are attracted to better wages, education, political and social stability, better technologies, and employment and business opportunities, and all these that can be offered in urban areas, which push rural citizens to leave their rural lives and work.
Urbanization allowed China to experience a remarkable economic boom. In 1978, China embarked on economic reforms and introduced open door policies that transformed the economy in ways that they did not expect.
From an economy where its market forces played no role in organizing economic activity, it became one of the major forces affecting global economies. The country also transformed into an economy where there was no foreign investments coming in and has a low foreign trade and exchange, to an economy that is now a foreign global recipient of foreign investment and an active trade and exchange.
Before the economic reforms, Chinese leaders already saw the need for political development and change in policies. In 1977, Deng Xiaoping emphasized the need for academics and scientists for the future of economic development and international standing of China. His reform was supported and accepted in 1978, and this became the turning point for China's policies for economic and social development.
It has been decided that there would be more economic activities for the country. Cooperation with other countries will be expanded. Special efforts will be made to adopt advanced technologies and equipment, and scientific and educational work will strengthen modernization.
Most importantly, the four modernizations were introduced, which focused on improvement of agriculture, industry, national defense, and science and technology, which are considered to be the main proponents for development. Production was greatly extensive because of urbanization, and it was promoted even more because of Deng Xiaoping's principle of each according to his work, rather than each according to his need. Because of this, people became attracted to the economic developments, particularly happening in the industrialized cities. Therefore, rural to urban migration became an important social phenomenon.
China's rural to urban migration is considered to be one of the largest sustained migrations in the world. From about 10% in 1949, urban population has grown to 50% by 2014.
The large numbers transferring to urban areas put a lot of pressure to these cities. In order to control migration, the government imposed a registration system, or the hukou, in 1954, which basically served as a population control and defined resource allocation.
Initially, the system was not intended to control the mobility of people, but was merely implemented to monitor individuals. It was only intensified in the 1960s when the collapse of the Great Leap Forward created a devastating shortage of food. The government had to keep the farmers in the rural areas where there is land to provide cheap agricultural products to the people and to factory workers in the cities.
Urban residents were privileged to receive state-allocated employment and access to various social services, while rural residents were expected to be more self-reliant.
With the hukou, it was almost impossible for rural citizens to migrate to urban areas. The system basically deprived both rural and urban citizens of their freedom of mobility.
The strict separation of Chinese residents as rural or urban has heightened the gap between these two areas.
Labor productivity is much higher in the urban areas than in rural areas, and labor barriers aggravate the situation. More so, welfare systems and rural land arrangements are identified as the main barriers for increasing migration costs and discourage movement.
Over the years, the hukou has become more flexible and less restrictive, on the influx of migration.
And this has both good and bad implications on the country's economy.
Rapid urbanization created more cities that demanded for greater demand for cheap labor, which the surplus of workers in the rural areas can accommodate. Migrant workers were able to increase their income and somehow improve their economic situation. However, the Hukou system remains to be a hindrance to successful urbanization.
Since more migrants are entering the cities, unregistered population in urban areas is growing out of hand. For instance, about 13 million people are unregistered in Shanghai, plus 10 to 11 million migrant workers who are not covered by the benefits of the Hukou.
Migrants are excluded from the local public service system, which increases their vulnerability and creates a bigger disparity in the economy. More than that, the growing migrant population is becoming a burden to the urban areas in such a way that the quality of sectors like education and health are compromised just to accommodate the growing population. Despite the pressure on urban areas, the Chinese government still sees that increasing urbanization is the solution to most social problems faced by the country. For them, there are more gains than costs in attaining urbanization.
This will boost economic growth, lessen unemployment, and lessen income disparity between urban and rural residents, especially in the long run. In fact, the Chinese government aims to increase urban population from 40 to 60% of its 1.4 billion population by 2020.
As for the Hukou system, it is still implemented until today, but has been reformed in such a way that it does not treat migrants as second-class citizens.
Generally, urban hukus are now accessible to rural residents and welfare programs are no longer limiting.
There are arguments to fully eradicate the Hukou system, since it no longer serves its purpose of limiting movement from rural to urban areas since the system has been relaxed.
Hong Kong is basically a city created by migrants. From being a fish port to being a trading center for multinational companies, Hong Kong's economy was established through the colonization of the British administration. Due to its colonization, Hong Kong became one of the business centers of China. The city became dependent on migrant workers because it is in need of labor force, but it searched for specific workers. The British started to conduct a city-specific immigration policy to limit the influx of migrants to Hong Kong, at the same time maximizing the potential of each person to improve the economy of Hong Kong. After the British government gave back the independence of Hong Kong to China, it continued to create immigration policies to meet the demands of labor to the city. Because of the geography of Hong Kong, they faced the problem of having a large population with having a small landmass, because the immigration system they had was based on the Western model, which had a goal to address the large population. The people of mainland China were allowed before in the 19th century to enter Hong Kong with little restrictions. It was only after the three waves of migrants from mainland China did the British government limited the influx of people because of the large growing population of Hong Kong. It was through several factors in mainland China why the people migrated to Hong Kong. The first wave consisted the aftermath of World War II, where Chinese migrants moved to Hong Kong because of political reasons, or their relatives were living in Hong Kong, which was economically stable at that time. In 1945, the population of Hong Kong was estimated to be 600,000 that rose to 2.2 million by mid-1950s. Business entrepreneurs from mainland China were able to establish their businesses in Hong Kong, which became the main source of economic expansion. The second wave was between the 1960s and 1970s, where there was a widespread famine in mainland China due to the Great Leap Forward of Mao Zedong, where the agricultural policies were the main cause of the shortage of food. Some migrated to Hong Kong to establish their own farmlands, while others went to the Great Britain to establish themselves in saving their lives from famine. The third wave was in the 1970s, where there were illegal migrants who were able to enter the borders of Hong Kong but do not have the exit permits from mainland China. Because of legal matters, there was a large influx of people who were able to enter Hong Kong. This was due to the Communist government of China before, where migrants fled to Hong Kong to escape the Communist government. The British government had to impose immigration policies to limit the entering migrants from China because they threatened the social stability of Hong Kong. Hong Kong was not open to the idea at first to opening their doors to mainland China because of the refugee mentality of the Chinese migrants. Because of the refugee mentality, insecurities and uncertainties were prominent in Hong Kong because they felt that having Chinese nationals in Hong Kong would strengthen the competition for employment. Hong Kong was careful in accepting professionals from mainland China. Only after the handover of Hong Kong to China did migration accelerate. Since multinational companies resided in Hong Kong and a trading center for the Southeast Asian countries, jobs were more likely available and would pay more than rural areas in mainland China, which consisted of farming. To limit the migration of Hong Kong, schemes were used to screen people who were eligible to work and live in Hong Kong. The first scheme was introduced while Hong Kong was still part of the British colony. The first scheme limited Chinese nationals to 1,000 people per company. There were a lot of requirements to limit the influx of migrants, like bringing in relatives to Hong Kong was not allowed, and only 36 educational institutions in China were accredited for application to migrate in Hong Kong. After the United Kingdom handed over Hong Kong to China, the integration between Hong Kong and China continued to accelerate, but the scheme was later revised. After the first scheme for migration of professional workers from mainland China, there were several revisions to adhere to the demand of professional workers. There were 4 more revisions so that the business enterprises would not directly hire workers from mainland China. After a while, the Hong Kong government lifted the restrictions, such as bringing in family members to Hong Kong. The scheme is now quota-free, meaning that companies can hire workers from mainland China without limits. Getting migrant workers were regulated by the demand of workers from the business sector. The new scheme promoted social integration to the migrants to improve the economy of Hong Kong. Aside from business, they also accept migrants from other fields such as arts and sports. Candidates who are eligible to migrate to Hong Kong require a good educational background or technical qualifications. Those who are successfully permitted to migrate to Hong Kong, their initial employment will be 12 months, but may be extended following a 2-2-3 year scheme. After working in Hong Kong for 7 years, migrants now have the right to live in Hong Kong.
So is moving to the greener pasture always the best? In the case of mainland China and Hong Kong, it has brought both benefits and as well as costs. These two places experience economic growth because of urbanization, and led them to becoming the developed states that they are now. Compared to rural areas, there are more economic and social opportunities available in the cities. Rural citizens are drawn into these improvements with hopes of having better living conditions. Generally, increase in rural and to urban migration is good in the sense that it helps the expansion of economic growth.
However, rapid urbanization became a problem to both Hong Kong and mainland China because the growing population was becoming a burden to these urbanized areas, and it was difficult to regulate the influx of people. Both places imposed limiting the flow of migrants as a solution to the problem, but the policies implemented were too restrictive, that they introduced more problems, particularly social limitations.